So I'm watching this documentary called The Bigfoot Girl. It's a documentary about finding Bigfoot on Hulu, I think it is. Yeah, I got all these things. I got Hulu, Amazon, Netflix, Epix, HBO, Showtime. I mean, I got more movies than I could possibly watch in a lifetime queued up. So what do I watch tonight? I start watching a documentary on Bigfoot. Yeah, it makes sense, right? No, not really. Well, all right, whatever. Roll with it. It's what happens. I'm just kind of curious about this the Bigfoot Girl, I think the documentary is called on Hulu. Was just kind of curious and just clicked on it and started watching, and that was it. But anywho, so what happens in this documentary? Apparently this girl, sometime when she was like 6 or 7 years old, had an encounter that she was convinced was Bigfoot, and it stayed with her whole life, and now she's making a documentary, and she's going around interviewing people who have reported to have had encounters with Bigfoot. Now I'm watching this documentary, and it occurs to me as I'm watching it, it's a really good analogy for what we do. Because first of all, the first thing that occurs to me, okay, is I am completely agnostic on the subject of Bigfoot. I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't necessarily care one way or the other. I was just kind of curious if these stories are convincing or not. Now, Bigfoot could easily exist, or you could make a pretty strong case that it doesn't exist and these people had figments of their imagination. But I'm completely agnostic on it one way or the other, so I'm just willing to listen to what their stories are and see if I find them reasonably compelling. I'm almost completely neutral. I have nothing invested in it one way or the other. It doesn't make any difference to me at all. I'm just watching merely to satisfy my curiosity. Compare that to how most of you are as an atheist with the proposition God exists or God does not exist. You have way amount of emotional investment in the proposition God does not exist. So much so that I would warrant that you should actually be skeptical, yes, skeptical, about your ability to judge the information fairly and give it a fair hearing. Because honestly, you recognize clearly when Christians have all this emotional investment in the proposition God exists, and you start trying to present evidence that he doesn't, they just don't want to hear it because there's so much invested in it. But you do the same thing. Same thing on the other side of the equation. You have so much emotionally invested in the proposition God does not exist that you should actually, honest to God, do yourself a favor and be skeptical of your own ability to ascertain the facts clearly, because you have a dog in the fight. You aren't neutral. I don't care one way or the other if Bigfoot exists. And guess what? The first night I went into a church and I believe I found out that God exists, I didn't care one way or the other either. I was just kind of curious. My wife said, do you want to come to church tonight? Yeah, okay, I'll check it out. And I went with an open mind and an open heart. Nothing riding on the line either way. That's how you should approach these type of things. Neutral to the best of your ability. Totally neutral. Agnostic to the best of your ability. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Let me just examine the facts. So, anywho, moving right along. So, she's interviewing this couple, and this couple is reporting they had this encounter where they got dropped off with these snowmobiles and they see Bigfoot, and they both talk about this. They weren't really clear what it was, but it was this weird big brown thing that didn't move, and they ran away from it, and that's their story. Now, that was their story. They saw this big brown thing about 100 yards away, and it wasn't a bear and it wasn't a man, and they explained it kind of what it looked like, and they both saw it, and they froze, and they both got really scared, and then one of them said, can it catch us? And then they both run away when somebody said that. And they run to their truck and they drive off. And they didn't really tell too many people about it. Now, let's put a street epistemologist talking to them so we can underscore how street epistemology doesn't actually get at the root of what's going on. Because I had another little conversation with with Doug, Pine Creek Doug on my channel, where he started saying, asking, here's a couple, and they're saying, here is Bigfoot. We saw this creature this night that could easily have been Bigfoot. Now think of how illogical it would be to say to them, what would it take to convince you that it wasn't true? What would it take to convince you that you were wrong? Think of how illogical that question is in light of the information you're getting. Doug was trying to explain to me how that question actually makes perfect sense. It doesn't. It's involving yourself with the claimants. It's involving yourself with the believer. And it's completely ignoring. See, a legitimate scientist, if I were a legitimate scientist trying to ascertain whether Bigfoot exists or does not exist, and somebody was reporting to have seen it, something similar to Bigfoot, what they believe or don't believe, their confidence level or this or that, not really relevant. It's really not. People can be 100% confident and not have good reason for it, or they can be, well, I'm really not sure that it was what I saw, and they don't have a good reason for that either. Confidence level, what their confidence in their beliefs doesn't have any bearing, or it has very little correlation with the actual established facts that you're trying to establish. What you are trying to establish are the facts. Did they see something in the forest that day? Was it possibly not a bear? If you were a scientist, you go about it in a way that was methodical, dispassionate, and it would have very little to do with their claim, with them, with their emotional state. This is the flaw in epistemology. Epistemology involves itself solely with them and their emotional state and their confidence level and things like that. That's borderline irrelevant to what they actually saw in the forest. Does Bigfoot actually exist? See, you could have somebody, if you were good at street epistemology, you could, and basically why Bigfoot is a good analogy for Christianity. First of all, it's disputed territory just like Christianity. Second of all, there are people all over the map in terms of what they would claim about Bigfoot. Some of them in this documentary have really strong experiences with Bigfoot and are really convinced it was Bigfoot and they saw it more than one time. And others have that one experience that one time. Now, I tried to explain to an atheist how Christian belief is like this long time ago in one of my first YouTube chats. And honest to God, he started approaching it totally from a cock and bull place. I started explaining to him that certain Christian beliefs are all over the place in terms of their confidence level and what they derive the belief from. He starts telling me, how do you know who are you to pass judgment on other people's beliefs? It was the most ridiculous conversation I've ever had. Because he wasn't actually honestly trying to deal with the information. See, there are some people, for example, with the Bigfoot, there could be someone like this couple who saw it once. And they're not really clear that it was Bigfoot. They're not saying this absolutely was Bigfoot. We're 100% convinced. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a man. We both saw it. Those are the facts. Those are the facts. Their confidence level about those facts is irrelevant. Me walking them away from what those facts mean to them would be the totally wrong approach, and that's what a street epistemologist would do. Let me walk you away from what that was. What would it take to convince you we're wrong, couple? And then you start questioning them and challenging them. Depending on the type of personality you're dealing with, that's all it depends on. It doesn't depend on what was actually seen in the forest. Do you see the problem? Because if it was a certain type of personality that wasn't that strong and was subject to emotional manipulation, I could probably convince them that their own mother doesn't exist. And so could a good street epistemologist, correct? If you're a street epistemologist listening to this, don't you think that's honestly correct? That there's a certain type, don't you kind of honestly know when you're dealing with somebody that you could easily walk off their beliefs, and when you're dealing with someone you can't? I bet you $1,000 that you do. And it has nothing to do with the facts of what they actually believe, whether what they believe is rooted in truth or not. So let's go back to Bigfoot. What did they see in the forest? Certain type of personality, I could probably convince them that they didn't see anything, even if they did. That's my point. And that's what a street epistemologist needs to recognize. The confidence level of the claimant is irrelevant to the facts. Hello, did you hear me? And you can't change that because that's a God's honest truth. The confidence level of the claimant is irrelevant to the facts. It's based on the psychology of the claimant. It's not based on what they saw. Did you hear me? Because that's a God's honest truth. So if you were trying to establish the facts of what they believe, did they see something in the forest? You'd have to go about it a totally different approach than a street epistemologist approach. Because what they believe about it is basically immaterial. Certain type of person would be totally confident. Oh yeah, I totally saw Bigfoot. Certain type of person would just hesitate, because that's how people are. They're psychologically different. And like I said, you get a certain type of person, you could probably convince them their own mother doesn't exist. You could probably convince, because they're just that vulnerable to that type of manipulation. Now, let's put it back into the God belief. As I've explained, let's go to the actual substance of a spiritual claim that comes from my very life, that happens every single Sunday, that I brought up in this video time and time again. Now, if we were being dispassionate and we were just trying to establish the facts. See, there are some Christians out there who, if we're making the analogy to Bigfoot, experienced Bigfoot one time 15 years ago, that one time, and I thought it was Bigfoot and I could be wrong. There's a type of Christian who's maybe a Christian because they were raised a Christian. There's a lot of that. Doesn't bear any relationship on whether God exists or God does not exist. The confidence level of the whole army of Christians doesn't bear any relationship on whether God exists or does God exist or does not exist. In order to ascertain the truth of whether God exists, just like with Bigfoot, we'd have to focus solely on the most confident ones, the ones who are 100% certain. Because there are some people in this documentary who think they've seen Bigfoot 50 times. And they're either crazy or they're lying, or there's something we need to account for. And that's where we are with religious belief. Because, for example, I could present you an army. I could present you 200 people every single Sunday. And if we were using the tools of science, there's a couple of things that we could ascertain as actual established facts about the phenomena that I experience every single Sunday, which is what produces the God belief in the people who come in the church. Like I've said in the past, people walk into that church, non-believers, and experience something that's real to them and walk out believers. Why? Because something happens there. The confidence level of a handful of individuals involved in that phenomena is irrelevant. We'd have to take the strongest ones, because I could line up 100 people, and we could start in a methodological way, an analytical way. It's just establishing facts. For example, supposedly lie detectors are not trustworthy. Correct? I suppose you can't use them in a court of law because you can't really fully trust them. But it's easy for me to imagine, I'm sure you could also imagine a time 30, 40 years from now when they've brought some technological advances to the science of lie detection, and they have lie detectors that are case closed, almost 100% reliable. I don't know if that could happen, but it's not hard for me to imagine that there could be a day where we have such a thing as lie detectors that are 100% trustworthy. So let's just say for argument's sake that we line up 100 people, and I promise you this is true. The 100 most confident people in that church, if you said to them, is God actually visiting that church when that worship music starts? Is that actually the Holy Spirit moving through the people? They would say, and they would not be lying at all, yes. So they, honest to God, believe it 100%. Now, if I put you, the non-believer, in that room, and you would experience the phenomena, promise, you would feel something, and that something would freak you out to one degree or another, and that experience would be real to you. Now, would you say, that's God, Craig? No, probably not. But that's where you got to take a look at yourself, because can you trust yourself? No, you can't. Let's be perfectly honest. No, you can't. No, you can't. Did I stutter when I said that? No, I didn't. No, you cannot. Why? Because you have too much emotionally invested in that can't be God. Too much emotional investment. If I put a legitimate scientist in that room with no dog in the fight, and for argument's sake, I consider myself, I had no dog in the fight the first time I experienced that. None. Didn't care one way or the other, honestly. Wasn't looking for it to be a real experience of God. Really wasn't. Pretty content with where my life was at, thanks. I experienced it because I was open to it. And I had no preconceived notions of what was possible and what wasn't. So if I put a legitimate scientist in that room, and if you were being a legitimate scientist, it would behoove you to put yourself at neutral. At neutral. I can neither confirm nor deny. I'm just going to report how this sensation, I experience this sensation. Period. That's not an atheist. Because an atheist will be jumping all over themselves to deny almost immediately. Promise. Promise. That's exactly what an atheist would do. But that's not what a person who wants to find out if something is really going on there would do. That's my point. That's not what an honest seeker of the truth would do. Call yourself honest seekers till you're blue in the face. An honest seeker would put themselves at neutral. Period. If you wouldn't be willing to do that, you wouldn't be an honest seeker. And I sincerely doubt most atheists listening to me would put themselves at neutral. Atheist. I'm not pointing at anyone in particular. You work it out for yourself. Think about that. Does that sound true to you? Because really think about it. I'm not talking to anyone in specific. You don't have to be defensive. I'm not the one being defensive, Craig. You're the one being defensive. No, you're the one being defensive. Honestly, think about it. If I put you in an experience like that, you'd be defensive through the roof. I promise you would. And if you think that's not true, you're not being honest with yourself and you don't know yourself. And you should be more skeptical. You're great skeptics, right? Be skeptical about yourself. Be skeptical about yourself. Be skeptical about your own integrity to yourself. Be skeptical about your own powers of observation. Because that's what a legitimate scientist would do. They'd be checking themselves every step of the way. Not trying to debunk, dismiss, discredit the phenomenon itself. And that's exactly what somebody would do if they were trying to experience Bigfoot. They'd put themselves in the place where the people had the most powerful experience of Bigfoot. And they try to legitimately approach it from neutral. They wouldn't approach it from, I don't think these people are right. Why? Because that wouldn't be valid science. They'd approach it from neutral. Let's see. Let's see if these people are right. Same idea. If I put you in a church. Same idea. So I think that's noteworthy. I really do. I really think what I just said is noteworthy in a lot of different ways. And I think I gave somebody somewhere valuable insight. I don't know who. Maybe nobody. Well, whatever. Whatever. Maybe I'm still talking to myself, but I don't think I will be for long. Honestly, I really don't. Really don't. Because I think I made some really valid points. Skepticism isn't just about the phenomena or the claimant. It's really easy to be skeptical. It's really easy to walk somebody off of their beliefs. Why? Because people are vulnerable and they're psychologically fragile. And it's no great accomplishment. That's why I don't really care what other people believe. Why? Because I don't really trust that they have all this important knowledge that I need to hear from. What you can convince other people of, what you can walk them away from, is borderline immaterial to what is in fact true. It really is. Some of those people who had legitimate experiences of Bigfoot, I am relatively certain you could sit them down with a good street epistemologist and they could convince them that they didn't. Within a short period of time. Doesn't prove anything, because they still might have had that experience. And if you're just approaching it from, no, you didn't, let me ask you questions until I undermine your confidence. Certain type of psychological vulnerability, be easy to undermine their confidence. I promise you that's true. You get a certain type of person in with a good enough street epistemologist, and you could probably undermine their confidence that their own mother exists. Promise. It's nothing to do with what's true. It has to do with the psychological vulnerability of the person you are talking to. Period. Those are the people who convert according to by street epistemology. Those are the people. The people who you can get under their skin and rattle their cage and make them think. Doesn't mean that you are right. Doesn't mean they're wrong. Doesn't mean they were wrong when you made them think. Just means they're vulnerable. That's it. That's it. Promise that's true. I promise you that's true, man. I swear to God. I swear to God that's the truth. So help me God. I swear it is. Street epistemology is not finding out anything about what's true. You are finding out what people believe and you are testing their psychological vulnerabilities. That's it. And people who are psychologically vulnerable could be walked away from probably freaking anything under the sun. Anything under the sun. And people who aren't psychologically vulnerable, again, having nothing to do with the facts of what they believe. There are some people who are psychologically vulnerable and some people who aren't. And the people who aren't, my wife, you couldn't street epistemology her away from anything. Anything. You couldn't. Doesn't matter if she's right. Honestly, it doesn't matter if she's right. Some people are just like that. So, there you have it, kids. That is all for now. Just thought I'd point that out. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.